My name is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, and at my own wedding reception, my husband's father looked me dead in the eye and said, "My son needs a warrior by his side, not some paper-pushing princess." He had no idea that the weak desk jockey he was dismissing had just coordinated the mission that brought his son home alive from Afghanistan 3 months earlier. The late spring air at Fort Bragg carried the scent of Carolina jasmine as I stood in my simple ivory wedding dress, watching my new in-laws circle like vultures around fresh prey. The officers' club buzzed with military conversations, but I felt utterly alone in the crowd. I had spent 6 months carefully crafting the perfect facade. To Jake Morrison, my husband and sergeant major in Special Forces, I was simply Sarah Chen, a quiet intelligence analyst who worked some administrative position at the Pentagon. It wasn't technically a lie. I did work with intelligence. I just happened to command the entire Southeast Asian Operations Division. Jake knew I had security clearance and traveled for briefings. What he didn't know was that when his team received mission parameters, those orders came from me. When they called for close air support in Kandahar, I was the voice on the encrypted radio, call sign Phoenix 6. But tonight, I wasn't a lieutenant colonel. I wasn't a combat veteran with 2 tours and a bronze star hidden in my jewelry box. Tonight, I was just the bride who apparently wasn't tough enough for Morrison family standards. Robert Morrison, Jake's father, stood like a monument to military pride. 28 years as a Marine had carved deep lines around his steel-gray eyes. His wife, Margaret, possessed the social battlefield awareness that could destroy reputations with a single well-placed whisper. "Sarah, sweetheart," Margaret approached with that particular military wife smile, all warmth on the surface, ice-cold calculation underneath. "I was just telling Colonel Bradford's wife about your work situation." My work situation, as if my career was some unfortunate condition polite society shouldn't discuss. "It's wonderful that you have a stable government job," she continued, her voice carrying just far enough for nearby conversations to pause. "Jake needs that consistency. After everything he's been through in the field, he deserves to come home to peace and quiet." The subtext hung in the air. "You're safe. You're soft. You'll never understand the warrior he really is." Jake appeared at my elbow, handsome in his dress blues, his ranger tab and deployment patches telling the story of a soldier who'd seen America's longest war. His smile was apologetic, but he didn't contradict his mother. He never did. "Dad's been looking forward to sharing some stories with you," Jake said, squeezing my hand. "Help you understand what military life is really like." I nodded politely, swallowing the irony. In 3 hours, I'd be briefing the Joint Chiefs on the very operations Jake's father wanted to explain to me like I was a civilian tourist. Robert joined our circle, his chest full of ribbons catching the chandelier light. "Sarah, I hope you're ready for what you've signed up for," he said, his tone carrying the weight of a man who'd buried too many brothers in arms. "Marriage to a warrior isn't like the movies. Jake's seen things that would break most people. He needs a wife who can handle the darkness he carries." His eyes, kind but condescending, held mine. "I'm not sure someone with your background really understands what that means." The challenge was unmistakable. In his world, I was untested, unproven, a civilian playing dress-up in military society. If only he knew that the last time I'd seen his son in Afghanistan, I'd been giving orders while Jake followed them. As the evening wore on, I caught glimpses of Jake's unit scattered throughout the reception. Men I'd commanded from a secure bunker, whose voices I knew from countless radio checks, whose lives I'd held in my hands during their darkest moments. They looked at me with curious recognition they couldn't quite place, like studying a familiar face in the wrong context. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, Jake's team leader, paused when our eyes met across the room, his head tilting as if trying to solve a puzzle. Jake pulled me onto the dance floor, and I smiled the serene smile of a new bride. But beneath the surface, I could feel the weight of the secret I carried, the truth that would either destroy this marriage or transform it completely. As we swayed to the soft melody, Jake whispered, "I love you just the way you are, Sarah. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." If only he knew that in less than 12 hours, everything he thought he knew about his gentle, administrative wife was about to change forever. The band transitioned into something more upbeat, and Jake spun me once before being pulled away by his old platoon sergeant. I watched him go, that easy smile on his face as he fell into the familiar rhythm of war stories and shared memories. This was his world, his tribe, and I was the outsider looking in. Margaret Morrison materialized beside me like smoke, her champagne glass catching the light as she surveyed the room with the practiced eye of a career military wife. "Such a lovely turnout," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that suggested the opposite. "Though I do worry about some of these younger wives. They simply don't understand what they're getting into." She gestured toward a group of women near the bar, their laughter bright and carefree. "Military marriage isn't for everyone, dear. It takes a special kind of strength to be an army wife. A kind of resilience that comes from truly understanding what our men face." The implication hung between us like a loaded weapon. I took a sip of my wine, tasting nothing but the bitter irony of the moment. "Take Jessica over there," Margaret continued, nodding toward a petite brunette in a blue dress. "Her husband did 3 tours in Iraq. She understands the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way they sometimes just disappear inside themselves. She's been through the crucible." Margaret's eyes found mine, steel wrapped in velvet. "I hope you're prepared for that reality, Sarah. Jake has seen terrible things, lost good men. There are nights when he wakes up screaming, days when the smallest sound makes him reach for a weapon that isn't there." I knew about those nights. I'd been the one coordinating the medevac when Jake's convoy hit an IED outside Kandahar. I'd listened to his voice, steady and professional over the radio, as he called in casualties while dragging his wounded team leader to safety. But I couldn't tell her that. "I'm sure we'll work through whatever comes," I said quietly. Margaret's laugh was like ice cracking. "Work through it? Oh, honey, this isn't a relationship counseling session. This is about survival, about whether you can hold a warrior together when he's falling apart." Colonel Bradford, a thick-set man with kind eyes and a chest full of ribbons, approached our small circle. "Ladies, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all," Margaret said, her smile snapping back into place. "I was just explaining to Sarah here about the realities of military life. She has such a quiet job, very different from what our boys experience downrange." Bradford's gaze shifted to me, curious. "What's your background, Sarah, if you don't mind my asking?" "Intelligence analysis," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Mostly administrative work." "Ah," he nodded knowingly. "Desk work, important stuff, keeping the paperwork flowing. Very different world from what Jake's been through." The condescension was gentle but unmistakable. These were good people, honorable people, but in their minds I was permanently relegated to the category of civilian support staff. Necessary but separate from the real warriors. Robert Morrison joined our group, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Sarah," he said, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. You know, Jake's been through hell these past few years, lost some good friends over there." His voice carried the weight of genuine concern, the protective instinct of a father who'd watched his son go to war. He's going to need someone who understands that kind of pain, someone who can handle the darkness without breaking. He squeezed my shoulder, his grip firm but not unkind. I'm not trying to be cruel, but you seem like a gentle soul. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But Jake needs someone who's been tested by fire. Someone who won't run when things get difficult. The circle of conversation had grown. Other family members, Jake's military friends, their wives all listening to Robert Morrison's gentle but devastating assessment of my suitability as a military spouse. My son married a good woman, Robert continued, his voice carrying across the small crowd. But I hope she understands that loving a warrior means accepting that you'll always come second to the mission, to the brotherhood, to something bigger than yourself. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. These people had lived this reality, sacrificed for it, bled for it. In their eyes, I was an unknown quantity, unproven and potentially dangerous to the man they all loved. Jake appeared at the edge of the circle, drawn by the serious tone of conversation. Everything okay over here? Just sharing some wisdom with your lovely bride, his father said, clapping him on the back. Making sure she knows what she's signed up for. Jake's smile was strained as he looked between his family and me. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to defend me warring with his ingrained respect for his father's judgment. Sarah's tougher than she looks, he said finally, but even he sounded uncertain. The words hung in the air like a question mark, and I realized that tomorrow's mission briefing couldn't come soon enough. As the reception continued around me, my mind drifted back to another moment when someone had underestimated what I was capable of. West Point, 15 years ago, when I was just another cadet trying to prove she belonged. The memory came flooding back with crystal clarity. Beast Barracks, that brutal summer of indoctrination that separated the committed from the curious. I stood in formation with my fellow plebes, sweat stinging my eyes under the unforgiving August sun, while upperclassmen screamed instructions inches from our faces. Chen, Staff Sergeant Martinez had bellowed, "You think Mommy and Daddy's money is going to carry you through Ranger School? You think your fancy MIT professor father is going to solve equations for you when you're bleeding out in a foxhole?" I had stood at rigid attention while he continued his verbal assault. The other cadets could feel their sideways glances, the unspoken question, what was a privileged Asian girl from Cambridge doing here? My parents had asked the same question. Dr. James Chen, tenured professor at MIT, and Dr. Linda Chen, chief of surgery at Mass General, had built their lives on precision and quiet excellence. Military service wasn't part of their American dream. "You have opportunities we never had," my mother had said when I announced my West Point acceptance. "Why throw them away to play soldier?" But they didn't understand. Science and medicine were individual pursuits. The military was about serving something greater than yourself, protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The memory fast-forwarded through 4 years of academic excellence and leadership challenges. By graduation, I wasn't the rich girl playing soldier anymore. I was the cadet who had finished second in tactical studies, first in strategic planning, and had earned respect from peers who initially saw me as a quota filler. But the real test came at Fort Benning, when I became one of the first 3 women to attempt Ranger School. 61 days of hell designed to break the strongest men. This isn't about politics, Ranger instructor Kowalski had told us on day 1. This is about whether you can lead soldiers in combat. The enemy doesn't care about your gender. Neither do I. But if you can't hack it, you're gone. The first week eliminated half the male candidates. By week 3, I was one of only 2 women left. 20-mile road marches with full gear, endless hours patrolling through Georgia swampland, combat simulations that blurred the line between training and reality. The turning point came during a night raid simulation in the mountains of Dalonga. Everything went wrong. flawed intelligence, compromised communications, half our team wounded. I found myself commanding 8 exhausted soldiers, most skeptical of female leadership from day one. "Chen, what's your call?" Sergeant Williams had whispered, his face streaked with camouflage paint. These weren't actors, they were soldiers who needed leadership, trusting me to bring them home. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds, letting training take over. Instead of continuing the failed assault, I ordered tactical withdrawal, repositioned our forces, and coordinated a flanking maneuver that caught the opposing force completely off guard. We rescued the hostages with 0 casualties and eliminated the entire enemy force in under 10 minutes. That was textbook adaptation under pressure, Chen. Kowalski had said afterward. You didn't just follow the plan, you rewrote it when circumstances changed. That's what separates leaders from followers. 3 weeks later, I graduated with 37 soldiers out of the original 150. The Ranger tab wasn't just cloth, it was proof that I belonged, that I had earned my place through blood, sweat, and competence rather than politics. But even now, 15 years later, standing in my wedding dress surrounded by Jake's family, I was still fighting the same battle. Still proving that quiet strength could be just as valuable as loud bravado. The sound of laughter brought me back to the present, back to the officers' club, where my new in-laws continued their assessment of my suitability. Tomorrow, they would learn that the woman they'd dismissed as a paper pusher had been forged in the same fires that shaped their son. They just didn't know it yet, but Jake knew those fires intimately, even if he didn't know I'd walked through them beside him. My mind shifted to another memory, one that still haunted my dreams the day our paths had crossed in the mountains of Afghanistan without either of us realizing it. Operation Nightfall, 18 months ago. I was running tactical command from a secure bunker at Bagram Air Base, while Jake's Special Forces team conducted a high-risk hostage rescue in the Kunar province. 3 American contractors had been taken by Taliban forces, and intelligence suggested they had less than 6 hours before execution. The mission had gone sideways from the moment boots hit the ground. Phoenix 6, this is Reaper 2-1. Jake's voice had crackled through the encrypted radio, calm despite the chaos I could hear in the background. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate close air support. Grid reference follows. I stared at the digital map display, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I coordinated assets across a 100-mile radius. 2 Apache gunships were 15 minutes out, but Jake's team didn't have 15 minutes. The thermal imaging showed at least 30 enemy fighters closing in on their position. Reaper 2-1, Phoenix 6. I responded, my voice steady despite my racing heart. CAS is en route, but you need to move now. Recommend you break contact and extract to alternate LZ. Negative, Phoenix 6. We have eyes on the hostages. They're separated from the main force, approximately 200 meters north of our position. If we leave now, they're dead. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of command settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Every instinct told me to order the extraction. It was the safe call, the one that would bring Jake's team home alive. But 3 innocent lives hung in the balance. Reaper 2-1, I'm reading your position, I said, making a decision that would either save lives or haunt me forever. There's a dry riverbed running east-west, approximately 50 meters south of your current location. Use it for concealment and approach the hostage location from the west. I'll redirect the Apaches to suppress the main enemy force while you move. Roger that, Phoenix 6. We're moving. For the next 47 minutes, I orchestrated one of the most complex tactical operations of my career. I guided Jake's team through enemy territory using real-time satellite imagery, coordinated artillery strikes to cover their movement, and directed air support with surgical precision. When the shooting stopped, all 3 hostages were alive, and Jake's team had suffered only minor injuries. But it was what happened next that burned itself into my memory. Phoenix 6, Reaper 2-1. Jake's voice came through the radio, thick with emotion and exhaustion. I don't know who you are, but you just saved 6 American lives today. That was some of the finest tactical coordination I've ever experienced. You're a damn good officer. I had stared at the radio for a long moment, knowing that the man I was falling in love with, the man whose letters I read every night, whose voice I treasured in our stolen phone conversations, had no idea that the officer he was praising was the same paper pusher he was planning to marry. Just doing my job, Reaper 2-1, I had replied. Get your people home safe. 3 months later, Jake would tell me about that mission over dinner, describing the mysterious tactical coordinator who had guided them through hell with an almost supernatural understanding of the battlefield. He called Phoenix 6 the best combat commander he'd ever worked with, someone who could read a fight like a chess match and stay 3 moves ahead of the enemy. I had smiled and asked appropriate questions, playing the role of the supportive girlfriend who was proud but didn't really understand the complexities of what he did. Inside, I was burning with the need to tell him the truth, to share that moment of triumph that belonged to both of us. But operational security came first. Always. Now, standing in the officers' club surrounded by his family's gentle condescension, I wondered what Jake would think if he knew. Would he be proud that his wife was Phoenix 6? Or would he feel betrayed that I had been deceiving him for months? Margaret Morrison's voice cut through my reverie. Sarah, dear, you look 1,000,000 miles away. I hope all this military talk isn't overwhelming you. I smiled politely, the same serene expression I'd perfected over years of keeping secrets. Not at all, Mrs. Morrison. I find it fascinating. Well, that's sweet, she replied, her tone suggesting the opposite. Though I suppose it must be difficult to relate to stories about real combat when your own experience is so administrative. If only she knew that while she was planning charity luncheons, I had been planning operations that saved her son's life. But tomorrow, at 8 hours, that would all change. Tomorrow, Jake would walk into the mission briefing room and discover that his gentle, desk-bound wife had one more secret to share. The biggest one of all, except fate had other plans. 3 days into our honeymoon in the Blue Ridge Mountains, staying at a secluded cabin where the only sounds were wind through pine trees and Jake's quiet breathing beside me in the pre-dawn darkness. For 72 blissful hours, I had been nothing more than Sarah Morrison, newlywed, watching my husband decompress from years of deployment stress. Then my encrypted satellite phone buzzed at 3:47 a.m. I slipped out of bed, padding barefoot across the cold wooden floor to the kitchen where I'd hidden the device in a flour canister. The caller ID showed only a string of numbers that made my blood run cold. Emergency protocol, highest priority. Phoenix 6, I whispered into the phone, my voice barely audible. Colonel Chen, this is General Matthews. We have a situation developing in the South China Sea. Chinese naval forces have surrounded a Taiwanese cargo vessel carrying American contractors. Diplomatic channels are failing, and we need immediate tactical assessment. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of command settling over me like armor. Through the kitchen window, I could see Jake sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed for the first time in months. This was supposed to be our time, our beginning. How long do I have? I asked. You need to be at the Pentagon in 6 hours. This is moving fast, Colonel. I ended the call and stood in the darkness, torn between 2 worlds that were about to collide. Upstairs, Jake stirred, calling my name softly. Sarah, you okay, baby? I climbed back into bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Just couldn't sleep. Wedding jitters, I guess. He pulled me close, his warmth a stark contrast to the cold reality settling in my chest. We don't have to do anything today. Just us, just this. 3 hours later, I was dressed and packed, watching Jake's face crumble as I fed him the carefully rehearsed lie. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice breaking with genuine regret. "There's an emergency at work. Some kind of system failure that requires my security clearance. They're sending a car." Jake sat on the edge of the bed, still in his boxers, his expression cycling through confusion, disappointment, and finally resignation. "On our honeymoon, Sarah, really? I know how it looks, I know how it sounds, but this is my job, Jake. People are depending on me." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right, your administrative job. What kind of system failure requires an intelligence analyst on emergency status?" I had no answer that wouldn't blow my cover completely, so I did what I'd been trained to do. I deflected. "I'll make it up to you, I promise. Give me 48 hours, and then we'll have the rest of our lives." But Jake was already pulling on his clothes, his movements sharp with frustration. "This is exactly what my parents were talking about, isn't it? You don't understand the sacrifices this life requires. Military families put the mission first always, but you put your career first." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was simultaneously completely wrong and absolutely right. I was putting the mission first, a mission that could prevent an international incident and save American lives, but I couldn't tell him that. "That's not fair," I said quietly. "Isn't it?" He turned to face me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Doubt. "Sarah, I've been deployed for 15 months out of the last 2 years. I've missed birthdays, holidays, family emergencies. You know why? Because the mission comes first. Because protecting people matters more than my personal comfort." He gestured toward the door where I could hear the government sedan pulling up the gravel drive. "But you can't even put your marriage before some computer glitch." I wanted to scream that it wasn't a computer glitch, that American lives hung in the balance, that I was about to coordinate a response that could prevent a shooting war in the Pacific. Instead, I kissed his cheek and tasted the salt of my own tears. "I love you," I whispered. "More than you know." "Prove it," he said, not moving to stop me as I walked toward the door. "Come back to bed. Tell them to find someone else." For a moment, I wavered. Everything I'd ever wanted was in that room: love, acceptance, a normal life. But through the window, I could see the black sedan waiting, and beyond that, a world that needed Phoenix 6 more than Sarah Morrison needed a perfect honeymoon. "I can't," I said, the words tearing something fundamental inside me. "I'm sorry, but I can't." The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the mountain silence. As the sedan pulled away, I caught a glimpse of Jake in the rearview mirror, standing at the cabin window with his shoulders slumped in defeat. I had chosen duty over love, mission over marriage. It was the right choice, the only choice I could make. But as the mountains faded behind us and Washington loomed ahead, I wondered if it would cost me everything. I was right to worry. The South China Sea crisis consumed 72 hours of my life, coordinating naval movements and diplomatic back channels, while Jake sat alone in our cabin, then drove home to an empty house. By the time I returned, exhausted and emotionally drained, the damage was already spreading like infection through our new marriage. Jake was in the garage when I pulled into our driveway, working on his motorcycle with mechanical precision that told me he was trying to fix something other than the engine. He didn't look up when my car door slammed, didn't acknowledge my presence until I was standing directly beside him. "How was your emergency?" His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth I'd grown to depend on. "Resolved," I said carefully. "I'm sorry, Jake. I know how it looked, leaving like that." He finally raised his head, and I saw something that chilled me more than any enemy fire I'd ever faced. Indifference. Do you really know how it looked? I reached for him, but he stepped back, oil-stained hands hanging at his sides like weapons he couldn't use. It looked like my wife cares more about her career than her marriage. It looked like the woman I married doesn't understand that when you commit to someone, you commit completely. His voice cracked slightly. It looked like my parents were right. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Jake, that's not fair, you don't understand. No, Sarah, you don't understand. He turned back to the motorcycle, his movements sharp with frustration. You want to know what I did while you were gone? I called my mom, told her you'd left on our honeymoon for work. You know what she said? I waited, dreading the answer. She said, I told you so. Military wives sacrifice for their husbands' missions. Civilian wives sacrifice their husbands for their own. The garage felt like it was closing in around us. Everything I'd fought to build, everything I'd hidden to protect, was crumbling because I couldn't tell him the truth about who I really was. Over the following weeks, the distance between us grew like a chasm. Jake threw himself into training exercises with renewed intensity, staying late on base, volunteering for additional duties. When he came home, he was polite but distant, like a house guest making conversation with strangers. The worst part was watching him struggle with the demons I knew intimately but couldn't acknowledge. His PTSD episodes, which had been manageable during our courtship, returned with a vengeance. I'd wake to find him sitting on the edge of the bed at 0300 hours, staring into darkness with haunted eyes. Bad dream, I'd whisper, knowing exactly what kind of nightmare had visited him. You wouldn't understand, he'd reply, and the dismissal cut deeper each time because I understood better than he could possibly imagine. I knew about the IED blast that killed his team leader in Helmand Province because I'd read the after-action report. I knew about the firefight in Kunar where he'd carried 2 wounded soldiers to safety because I'd coordinated the medevac helicopters. I knew about the civilian casualties that haunted his sleep because I'd signed the operational orders that put his team in that village. But I couldn't tell him any of that without revealing everything else. Instead, I did what I could from the shadows. I used my position to ensure his unit received the best equipment, the most accurate intelligence, the fastest medical support when they deployed. I couldn't hold him when the nightmares came, but I could make sure he came home from each mission alive. It wasn't enough. Nothing I could do in secret was enough to bridge the gap my silence had created. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late summer. Jake was on the phone with his father when I walked into the kitchen, and Robert Morrison's voice carried clearly through the speaker. Son, I hate to say this, but maybe it's time to consider your options. A marriage that starts with abandonment doesn't usually get better. And Sarah, well, she's a lovely girl, but she's not a military wife. She's never going to understand what you need. Jake's eyes met mine across the kitchen, and I saw him weighing his father's words against whatever love remained between us. I know, Dad, he said quietly. I'm starting to think you might be right. That night, we lay in bed like strangers, the space between us feeling wider than the ocean I'd crossed to serve my country. Jake's breathing was deep and even, but I knew he wasn't sleeping. Neither was I. In the darkness, I made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, I would request reassignment to a position that would allow me to tell Jake the truth. I would sacrifice my career, my clearance, everything I'd built to save my marriage. But as I drifted towards sleep, my encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message that would make that sacrifice impossible. The text was brief. Family dinner Sunday, 18 o'clock. We need to talk, Robert. I stared at the screen in the darkness, knowing this wasn't a social invitation. This was a military operation, and I was the target. Sunday arrived with the oppressive weight of a death sentence. Jake had been unusually quiet all week, avoiding eye contact during our stilted breakfast conversations. When he emerged wearing his dress uniform instead of casual clothes, I knew this dinner was going to be a formal execution. The Morrison family home sat on 2 manicured acres in Fayetteville, a monument to military tradition with its perfectly maintained lawn and flagpole. Walking through the front door felt like entering a court-martial. Margaret greeted us with the kind of smile that preceded bad news. The dining room had been arranged like a battlefield. Robert sat at the head in his dress blues, every ribbon catching the chandelier light. Margaret flanked him on the right, Jake on the left. I was seated directly across from Robert, isolated and outnumbered. The meal progressed with military precision, each dish accompanied by increasingly pointed conversation. Margaret shared news about other military wives, emphasizing their sacrifices. Robert recounted stories of Marines who'd lost marriages to incompatible spouses. Finally, as Margaret cleared dessert plates, Robert launched his assault. "Sarah," he began, his voice carrying 3 decades of command authority, "Jake has shared concerns about your marriage. As his family, we feel obligated to address them directly." I glanced at Jake, but he was studying his hands, unable to meet my eyes. "We understand you have a career," Margaret added, her tone suggesting career was a communicable disease. "But marriage to a warrior requires certain adjustments." Robert leaned forward, steel-gray eyes boring into mine. "Jake has dedicated his life to serving this country. He sacrificed his youth, his peace of mind, his emotional well-being for the mission. He deserves a wife who understands that commitment." The words hung in the air like battlefield smoke. This wasn't conversation, it was intervention, carefully planned and ruthlessly executed. "What Robert means," Margaret continued with false gentleness, "is that we're concerned you don't grasp what military life demands. Your recent departure during your honeymoon suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of priorities." Heat rose in my chest, the controlled anger I'd perfected in classified briefings where generals questioned my recommendations because of my age or gender. "With respect, Mrs. Morrison," I said quietly, "I think I understand sacrifice better than you might imagine." Robert's expression hardened. "Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you put your administrative job ahead of your husband's emotional needs. That's not sacrifice, that's selfishness." Administrative job. The dismissal in those words contained everything they thought about me, everything Jake had been led to believe. I was a paper pusher while real warriors fought real battles. "Jake," Robert turned to his son, "you've seen what real military marriages look like. Your mother spent 30 years moving wherever the Corps sent us, never complaining when I deployed for months. She understood the mission came first, always." Margaret nodded sagely. I knew my place in Robert's life. The Corps came first, family second, everything else third. That's how military marriages survive. Jake finally raised his head, conflict written across his features. "Sarah's different from military wives, Dad. She has her own career, her own priorities." The way he said priorities felt like a blade between my ribs. "Son," Robert's voice softened with paternal concern, "you can't build a life with someone who doesn't share your values. Can you honestly say Sarah understands what you've been through, what you've seen?" I wanted to scream that I understood better than any of them. That while Margaret planned charity galas, I was planning operations that brought their son home alive. That every successful mission Jake completed had been coordinated by the woman they were dismissing as a selfish civilian. Instead, I sat in silence, watching my marriage dissolve under secrets I couldn't share. "We're not asking you to make a choice tonight," Margaret said gently, her hand covering Jake's. "We're just asking you to consider whether this is the partnership you need. whether Sarah is truly prepared to be the wife a warrior deserves. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Robert's grandfather clock, each second marking another step toward the end of everything I'd tried to build. In 12 hours, Jake would report for a classified briefing that would change everything. But sitting in that dining room, surrounded by his family's quiet certainty, I wondered if it would already be too late. The drive home was a funeral procession of silence. Jake stared out the passenger window while I navigated the familiar streets, both of us processing the evening's carefully orchestrated assassination of our marriage. When we pulled into our driveway, he finally spoke. "They're not wrong, you know. I killed the engine but didn't move to get out. About what? About priorities, about understanding what this life requires." He turned to face me, his eyes reflecting the porch light like broken glass. "I need a partner who gets it, Sarah. Someone who understands that sometimes the mission has to come first." The irony was so thick I could taste it. "And you think I don't understand that? How could you?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended. "You've never been deployed, never had to make life-or-death decisions with incomplete information. You file reports and attend meetings. It's not the same thing." I wanted to tell him about the satellite feeds I'd watched, showing his convoy under fire in real time. About the sleepless nights coordinating air support while he fought for his life thousands of miles away. About the weight of command that came with holding other people's lives in your hands. Instead, I said nothing. Inside the house, Jake went straight to the bedroom while I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. At 21:47, my secure phone rang. "Phoenix 6. Colonel Chen, this is General Matthews. We have a situation developing rapidly. Chinese naval forces have seized the cargo vessel we've been monitoring. They're demanding the release of detained nationals in exchange for the American contractors." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of crisis settling over me. What's the timeline? 12 hours before they transfer the hostages to the mainland. After that, diplomatic recovery becomes nearly impossible. We need operational plans by 6. Through the bedroom door, I could hear Jake moving around, probably packing for whatever training exercise was scheduled for tomorrow. He had no idea that in 6 hours, he'd be sitting in a briefing room while I outlined the very mission that would determine whether Americans lived or died. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, I said. The Pentagon at midnight was a different beast than during daylight hours. Skeleton crews manned critical stations while the real work happened in secured conference rooms where maps glowed under fluorescent lights and coffee grew cold in forgotten cups. I spent the next 5 hours crafting operational parameters that would thread the needle between diplomatic disaster and military catastrophe. At 5:30, I finally allowed myself to think about Jake. He'd be waking up soon, probably assuming I was already at my administrative job dealing with some minor crisis. The thought of his continued ignorance felt like acid in my stomach. I returned home just as his alarm was going off. He emerged from the bedroom in his ACUs, moving with the efficient purpose of a soldier reporting for duty. "You're up early," he said, noting my business attire. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd get a head start on the day." He nodded absently, checking his gear with automatic precision. "I've got a briefing this morning, some kind of classified operation, probably another training scenario." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Sounds important." "Yeah, well, everything's important these days." He paused at the door, something unresolved flickering across his features. "Sarah, about last night. Maybe we should talk when I get back. Really talk." "I'd like that," I said, knowing that by the time he returned, everything between us would be different. After he left, I sat in our empty kitchen drinking coffee that tasted like regret. In 2 hours, Jake would walk into Conference Room C at Fort Bragg and discover that Phoenix 6, the tactical coordinator he'd praised as the finest combat commander he'd ever worked with, was sitting across the breakfast table from him every morning. He'd learned that every successful mission, every precisely coordinated extraction, every piece of intelligence that had kept him alive had come from the woman his family considered a selfish, career-obsessed civilian who couldn't understand military sacrifice. The question that haunted me as I prepared for the day ahead wasn't whether he'd be shocked or angry or proud. The question was whether discovering my true identity would save our marriage or deliver the final blow that destroyed it completely. Either way, the deception that had protected us both was about to end, and I had no idea what would rise from its ashes. The mission briefing lasted 6 hours. By 18, Jake's unit was wheels up, heading into the South China Sea to execute an operation I had designed from the shadows. For 48 hours, I lived in 2 worlds. During the day, I was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, monitoring satellite feeds from a Pentagon bunker. At night, I was Sarah Morrison, the worried wife waiting by the phone. The operation was flawless. Jake's team extracted all 4 American contractors without casualties. When Jake finally called Thursday morning, his voice was electric with adrenaline. "We did it, Sarah. Clean extraction, 0 complications. This Phoenix 6 character, whoever runs tactical coordination, is a damn genius." I pressed the phone closer, savoring praise I could never acknowledge. "I'm so proud of you. When do you come home?" "Tomorrow afternoon, but my parents want to throw a welcome home party this weekend. The whole unit, their families. You okay with that?" My stomach clenched. Of course. But as I hung up, I realized Robert Morrison's party wasn't just celebration. It was a stage. Saturday evening arrived with inevitable weight. The Morrison backyard had been transformed into a patriotic shrine, bunting, potluck tables, and enough American flags to outfit a parade. Jake's entire Special Forces unit was there, along with wives, children, and half of Fayetteville's military community. I stood near the drinks table, watching Jake hold court with his teammates. He was animated, describing the mission, his face alive with joy that only came from shared danger survived. This was his tribe, and I was the outsider. "Sarah!" Margaret materialized beside me, her smile sharp as a bayonet. "So wonderful you could make it. I know how busy your work keeps you." She guided me toward unit wives near the pool women who'd married into this brotherhood, who understood military life in ways I apparently never could. "Ladies, meet Sarah Morrison, Jake's new wife," Margaret announced. "Sarah works for the government, something with computers." The women smiled politely, but I caught their exchanged glances. I was being evaluated against standards I didn't know existed. As conversation continued around me, I studied Jake's teammates. These were men I'd commanded from shadows, whose voices I knew from radio chatter, whose lives I'd held in my hands. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez caught my eye across the yard, tilting his head with the same puzzled expression from our wedding. Staff Sergeant Williams paused mid-conversation, his gaze lingering uncomfortably. Rodriguez intercepted me near the back door. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind saying, but you look familiar. Have we met before?" My heart hammered. "Maybe at Jake's promotion ceremony." "No, that's not it." His eyes were intelligent, searching. "It's your voice, something about the way you speak. Very precise, military-style communications." Before I could respond, Robert Morrison's voice boomed across the backyard. "Attention, everyone! If I could have your attention, please." The crowd gathered around his makeshift stage. Jake stood beside his father, looking embarrassed by the formal ceremony. "We're here to celebrate not just my son's safe return, but his entire unit's success," Robert announced. Operation Pacific Dawn was a testament to American military excellence. Applause rippled through the crowd. But success requires more than brave soldiers. It requires exceptional leadership, precise coordination, and tactical brilliance. Jake's team had all that, thanks to their mysterious mission commander, call sign Phoenix 6. My blood turned to ice. Unfortunately, Phoenix 6 operates at a classification level requiring anonymity, but I've been told this officer's tactical genius saved American lives and prevented an international incident. Robert's eyes found mine across the crowd. It got me thinking about leadership, about sacrifice, about different ways people serve their country. Some serve in the light, where everyone can see their valor. Others serve in shadows, where their sacrifice goes unrecognized. He paused, his gaze never leaving my face. I wonder if we're too quick to judge people based on what we can see, rather than what they might be hiding. The crowd murmured appreciatively, but I felt like a deer in headlights. Robert Morrison knew something. The question was, how much? And what was he planning to do about it? I didn't have to wait long for my answer. But tonight isn't just about celebrating our brave soldiers. Robert continued, his voice carrying across the silent backyard. It's also about recognizing that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes the people we least expect are carrying the heaviest burdens. He gestured toward the back of the crowd, and I followed his gaze to see a figure in dress blues approaching through the gathering. My heart stopped. It was Captain Rodriguez, not Jake's Rodriguez, but Captain Maria Rodriguez from the Pentagon, my direct liaison with Special Operations Command. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert announced, "I'd like you to meet Captain Rodriguez, who has something very important to share with us tonight." Maria walked through the parting crowd with military precision, her eyes finding mine with an expression I couldn't read. When she reached the makeshift stage, she accepted the microphone from Robert with a crisp nod. "Good evening, everyone. I apologize for interrupting your celebration, but I'm here on official business." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to briefing generals. "I represent the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I've been authorized to make a special presentation tonight." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the children stopped their playing, sensing the gravity of the moment. Over the past 18 months, American forces have conducted 17 high-risk operations in the Pacific Theater. These missions have saved 347 American lives, prevented 3 international incidents, and maintained critical strategic balance in one of the world's most volatile regions. Jake stood frozen beside his father, his expression cycling between confusion and dawning recognition. "The success of these operations," Maria continued, "has been due to the exceptional tactical coordination of one individual, an officer whose strategic brilliance and operational precision have redefined modern combat command." My legs felt like water. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The officer I'm referring to operates under the call sign Phoenix 6, and thanks to recently declassified information, I'm finally authorized to reveal their identity. Robert Morrison's smile was triumphant as he gestured toward me. "Captain Rodriguez, I believe you'll find your mystery officer right here among us." Every head in the backyard turned toward me. 43 pairs of eyes, including Jake's, boring into me with expressions ranging from curiosity to shock to something approaching awe. Maria's gaze found mine across the crowd. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, would you please step forward?" The world tilted sideways. Somewhere in the distance, I heard Margaret Morrison gasp. Jake's mouth fell open, his eyes wide with disbelief. The Special Forces soldiers who'd been studying me all evening suddenly straightened, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. Colonel Chen, Maria's voice was gentle but firm. Your country is ready to honor your service. Somehow my feet carried me forward through the crowd that parted before me like water. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, but I kept moving until I stood beside Maria on the small stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Maria announced, her voice ringing clear in the evening air. I present Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, call sign Phoenix 6, commanding officer of Pacific Theater Special Operations. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, like a wave breaking, Jake's entire unit snapped to attention in perfect unison. 43 people rendering honors to the woman they dismissed as a paper-pushing civilian. Jake stood among them, his face a mask of shock and something that might have been pride, his hand frozen halfway to his forehead in an incomplete salute. Colonel Chen, Maria continued, has been awarded the Distinguished Service Medal, the Bronze Star with V device, and the Defense Superior Service Medal for her actions in coordinating Operation Pacific Dawn and 16 other classified missions. She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a small velvet box. By order of the Secretary of Defense, and with the gratitude of a nation, I'm authorized to present you with the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious service. As Maria pinned the medal to my sundress, the absurdity of the moment struck me. Here I was, receiving one of the military's highest honors while wearing a flowered dress at a backyard barbecue, in front of a man who thought I was too weak to be his wife. The crowd erupted in applause, but I only had eyes for Jake. His salute was finally complete, sharp and precise, but his expression was unreadable. For 3 years, I'd hidden in the shadows, protecting him from dangers he never knew existed. Now, standing in the harsh light of recognition, I had no idea if the truth would save us or destroy everything we'd built. The applause gradually faded, leaving behind a silence so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. Jake stood frozen in his salute, his eyes locked on mine with an expression I'd never seen before, not shock, not anger, but something deeper. Recognition, understanding, the slow, devastating realization of what he'd been blind to. Phoenix 6, he whispered, his voice carrying across the silent yard. All this time, you were Phoenix 6. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Jake's hand finally dropped from his forehead, but he remained at attention. Operation Nightfall, Kunar Province, when we were pinned down and you guided us through that riverbed. His voice cracked slightly. That was you. Yes, the hostage rescue, the artillery coordinates that saved Rodriguez's life, the extraction plan that brought us all home. Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. Every mission, every time we called for tactical support, every time, I confirmed quietly. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez stepped forward, his face transformed by understanding. Ma'am, I need to apologize. At the wedding, I knew I recognized your voice, the way you spoke. It was Phoenix 6's communications style. Staff Sergeant Williams joined him, followed by the rest of Jake's unit. One by one, they stepped forward, forming a semicircle around the small stage. Colonel, Williams said, his voice thick with emotion, you saved my life in Kandahar. If you hadn't redirected that air strike. And mine in the Arghandab Valley, added Corporal Martinez. That night ambush, your tactical coordination was the only reason we made it out. Jake watched his brothers in arms, men he'd bled with, fought beside, trusted with his life, render honors to the woman his family had dismissed as weak, the woman he doubted, the woman who'd been his guardian angel without him ever knowing it. Margaret Morrison stood near the pool, her mouth agape, her perfectly constructed worldview crumbling in real time. Robert, for once in his life, was speechless. Captain Rodriguez stepped back to the microphone. There's one more thing the Pentagon wanted me to share tonight. Colonel Chen didn't just coordinate these missions, she volunteered for them. Specifically, she requested assignment to any operation involving Sergeant Major Morrison's unit. Jake's head snapped up. What? For the past 3 years, Colonel Chen has used her position to ensure your unit received the best intelligence, the most accurate targeting data, and priority support for extraction and medical evacuation. She put her career on the line repeatedly to keep you safe. The weight of this revelation settled over Jake like a physical force. His shoulders sagged as he processed the magnitude of what I'd done, what I'd risked, what I'd sacrificed in silence. The night I left our honeymoon, I said, finding my voice at last. It wasn't for a computer system. It was the South China Sea crisis. The mission you just completed, I spent 72 hours designing that operation, coordinating assets, making sure you had everything you needed to come home alive. Jake's eyes filled with tears he was too proud to shed in front of his unit. You let me think. You let my family think. I couldn't tell you. Operational security meant. No. His voice was firm, authoritative. He stepped closer to the stage, looking up at me with something that might have been awe. You let us think you didn't understand sacrifice, that you didn't understand what military service meant. He turned to face his parents, his voice carrying clearly across the backyard. While you were judging her for leaving our honeymoon, she was preventing a war. While you were questioning her commitment to our marriage, she was designing the mission that brought me home. Margaret's hands fluttered to her throat. Jake, we didn't know. That's the point, Mom. You didn't know. None of us knew. Because she was protecting all of us, protecting my security clearance, protecting the mission, protecting me from the knowledge that my wife was putting herself at risk every time she sent me into danger. He looked back at me, and for the first time in months, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with. Not the doubt, not the distance, but pure, unfiltered love mixed with a respect I'd never seen before. Sarah, he said, his voice breaking on my name. I am so sorry for doubting you, for not trusting you, for letting them make you feel like you weren't enough. He stepped onto the stage, and in front of his entire unit, his family, and half of Fayetteville's military community, he took my hands in his. I married a warrior, he announced, his voice strong and clear, the finest officer I've ever served under, and I was too blind to see it. Then Jake Morrison, Sergeant Major in the United States Army, got down on one knee in front of 43 witnesses and said the words I'd waited 3 years to hear. Will you forgive me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being worthy of the woman who's been protecting me all along? The backyard was absolutely silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Behind Jake, his entire unit stood at attention, waiting for my answer. Margaret Morrison pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Even Robert had removed his cover, holding it respectfully over his heart. Jake Morrison, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, you have never needed to be worthy of me. You just needed to trust that we were fighting the same war, even when you couldn't see my battlefield. I helped him to his feet, and when he wrapped his arms around me, the crowd erupted in applause that echoed across the neighborhood like artillery fire, the sound of a marriage finally finding its foundation. 6 months later, I stood in the same backyard, but everything had changed. The occasion was different. Jake's promotion to Master Sergeant, but more importantly, I was different. No longer hiding behind carefully constructed lies, I wore my dress blues with pride, the Legion of Merit gleaming on my chest alongside ribbons that told the story of a career I could finally acknowledge. Margaret Morrison approached me with a humility I'd never seen before. Sarah, I owe you an apology that I'll probably never finish making. We judged you so harshly, and all this time. You were protecting your son, I said gently. I understand that instinct better than you know. Robert joined us, his own dress blues immaculate as always, but his demeanor transformed. Colonel, I've been thinking about what you said that night about different kinds of battlefields. I served 30 years and never once considered that some of our finest warriors might be fighting wars I couldn't see. He extended his hand, and when I shook it, his grip was firm with genuine respect. Welcome to the family, daughter. The real welcome you should have received from the beginning. Jake found me later, standing near the same spot where I'd been humiliated months earlier. Now, instead of dismissive whispers, I heard fragments of conversation that made my heart swell. That's Phoenix 6. She saved my nephew's unit in Syria. 3 years coordinating missions in secret. Regrets? Jake asked, slipping his arm around my waist. I leaned into his warmth, watching his teammates interact with their families. These were people who understood that strength came in many forms, that sacrifice was often invisible, and that the greatest warriors sometimes fought their battles in silence. Only one, I said. I wish I could have told you sooner. I wish you could have known that when you were lying awake worried about the next mission, your wife was already working to bring you home safe. Jake turned me to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders. Sarah, you carried that burden alone for 3 years. You protected me, protected my men, protected national security, all while letting us think you didn't understand our world. That's not just courage, that's love in its purest form. As the sun set over Fayetteville, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. From that first night when Jake's father dismissed me as too weak for military life, to this moment where I stood surrounded by people who understood that true strength doesn't announce itself, it simply serves. The military had taught me many things: tactical precision, strategic thinking, the weight of command. But my marriage had taught me something equally valuable, that sometimes the greatest act of love is standing guard in the darkness, protecting those you care about from dangers they'll never see coming. Jake's unit began gathering for the traditional group photo, and Rodriguez called out, "Colonel Chen, you're front and center for this one." As I took my place among these warriors, I realized that I'd finally found what I'd been searching for all along, not just acceptance, but the recognition that service comes in many forms. Some serve in the spotlight, their valor visible to all. Others serve in the shadows, their sacrifice known only to themselves and history. Both are necessary. Both are noble. Both are worthy of honor. The camera flashed, capturing a moment that would hang in the Morrison family home for years to come, a reminder that the strongest among us don't always wear their strength on their sleeves, and that the most powerful voices sometimes speak in whispers only God and country can hear. Looking at each of you who have listened to this story, I see something familiar: the recognition that comes from understanding what it means to be underestimated, to have your strength questioned, to fight battles that others can't see. Your stories matter too. Your struggles, your victories, your quiet moments of resilience when no one else is watching, they all add up to something magnificent. Whether you're serving in uniform, raising the next generation, caring for aging parents, or simply showing up every day to do work that matters, you are warriors in your own right. Your battlefield might look different from mine, but your service is no less valuable. Thank you for letting me share this part of my journey with you. If this story resonated with something in your own life, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you believe that every story of quiet strength deserves to be heard, please subscribe to Honor Vindicated and share this with someone who needs to know that their hidden battles matter. Until next time, remember, true honor doesn't need recognition to exist. It just needs courage to continue. Stay strong, stay faithful, and never forget that your service, whatever form it takes, makes this world a better place.